But I'd like to turn now to Jaime Zobel. For a long time, the Philippines was considered the sick man of ASEAN. Great human capital, great companies, but an underperforming economy. And then in the last 2-3 years, since the new administration, things began to change in a rather dramatic way. Are there any experiences from the Philippines experience that you think would be useful for Myanmar as it catches up?
Thank you, Timothy. It's not often that the Philippines is asked to be shown as an example, I guess, to the rest of us. I take this as a deep compliment and one I'm delighted to hear at this stage. We've had, Timothy, as you well know, our bumps over the years. It has not been an easy growth path for the Philippines, and it's been hard for our country over time to build credibility, I guess, in the global arena. But I do believe that there are some examples that have gone well for the country, and perhaps as we look at Myanmar, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for your remarks, it's exciting to see the kind of platform that you're creating in the country right now. There's certainly examples in the Philippines that have worked, and I think what must be exciting for everybody in Myanmar is to have a chance to build based on models that have already been visible, processes that have already been tested and tried, and have a chance to start almost with a clean slate. I can think of no more exciting opportunity for a country moving forward, and certainly we were saying this in the gathering earlier, for the rest of ASEAN to have Myanmar create such excitement, I think is good for ASEAN as a whole, and so this is an exciting time for all of us. But let me just point to 3 things, Timothy, to address your issue. I think people have not given the Philippines credibility for a number of reasons over the years, only because we've had some leadership challenges, but there are a number of things that I believe the country has done well, and that I think are possible examples from Myanmar, and they refer to some of the issues that Manu was mentioning earlier. The first is, since the early 90s, there have been a number of structural reforms that the government has instituted over time that I think has led to the kind of strength we have today. Specifically, the central bank as we know it today, one of the most respected institutions in our country, was created in the early 90s. It was made up of professionals, it was made independent, and I think has built up a cadre of professionals that to this day remain one of the most respected civil servants in our country. And that has led to a macroeconomic stability in the country that you can see in our results today. Very low inflation, a very strong exchange rate, higher international reserves than we've ever had in our history. This is a product, I think, of the seriousness with which they have taken their job, and that, coupled with the crisis back in 1997 and the seriousness of our central bank governor and his team, has really led to a banking sector that is quite stable and I believe quite progressive. The second is we also liberalized the foreign banking industry in our country right after the creation of the central bank. That allowed competition to come in and also took up the standards in the banking community. We moved on with reforms from that point on. We liberalized our telecommunications sector. There was just one private sector entity providing telecommunication facilities in the Philippines prior to the early 90s. The government put up a competitive regulatory framework. They allowed investors to come in. About 10 telecom companies came in at one stage. I like to think that billions of dollars have been invested in the sector and really taken up the consumer's ability to choose products and participate in the communication sector in a way that would have never been possible had that industry not been deregulated. The government also privatized, a very bold move, the water distribution for the whole of Metro Manila. Metro Manila is a very large metropolis. Our whole water distribution network was severely antiquated. It was in public service hands. A lot of water was lost. Up to 67% of what was passing through was lost. And the government took a bold move with a very formal framework to privatize it, bid it out to 2 concessionaires, and allow private sector capital to enter. There was massive investment in cleaning up this area. And basically, with this investment, you have resulted in an industry or an infrastructure that has basically brought down the wastage of water from 67% down to 11%, which is a very aggressive number. And finally, in the energy sector, there's been a great deal of focus as well in liberalizing and encouraging investment to come in. So I guess the first issue that I wanted to put on the table is that there is an opportunity for a government that is reform-minded, using best practices that have been seen globally, to set up a competitive framework that encourages competition to come in and encourages foreign investment and local investment to enter sectors that were traditionally seen as public sector areas, and that can result in efficiency and investment. The second issue is this whole issue of public partnership frameworks. There is a chance more and more, I think increasingly governments, and I'm sure that will be the case in Myanmar, will find itself with resource allocation constraints. There is an inability for governments generally to be able to take care of all the needs of its citizens. Budgets are necessary for education, for military, for the development of public service. There will be resource allocation constraints, and I believe that if done right and structured right, the ability to create frameworks where the public and private sector come together to address traditional public sector needs is a very powerful instrument to create solutions, I guess, for the problems that exist. And finally, number three, and I think our country has come a long way in this respect, and we have not always been paragons of governance, but I do believe under this administration now, under President Aquino, the governance issues have been put very firmly on the agenda. There is a lot of seriousness about building credibility as a country, and that, I think, has created a lot of more trust in our country, trust that was lacking in the past, and led to, I guess, the investment community, both locally and internationally, to take up, I guess, their trust in our initiatives and what we're doing as a country to a much higher level. And that's created a momentum that has resulted in the kind of growth rates you see in the Philippines today. 6% for the first half, and even a 7% growth number for the last quarter of the year.